Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show, and already off to a prolific start. 2023, 12 years into my program. Had an opportunity last week to speak to Al Cooper and Bruce Hornsby back to back, and yeah, they're big name people, and they've done a lot for music, and they've been at the right place at the right time in rock and roll. But it's always important for me to continue to stretch my own knowledge and my own vocabulary as it relates to different kinds of art. And I have a chance today to speak to a cat, really a decorated illustrator and author, somebody who's written best-selling children's books, and people are still discovering them in their own tributaries today. Part of the Fuzzytown community, Zachariah Ohora. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Live in Fuzzytown. Thanks for having me.
Live in Fuzzytown, man. So Zachariah, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about, if you could, like the creative process for you, maybe not so much now, but early on. Did you, like, how did you create art and what I mean by that is, sometimes with me, if I'm in the middle of something, if I'm trying so hard, but there's something blocking it, I have a hard time stepping away. But oftentimes when I come back, a lot of stuff kind of just comes through me. And I just wonder how you learned to kind of get out of your own way to really hone your craft as an illustrator and an author.
Sure. That exact thing happens all the time. Not only just like, sort of the old writer's block or whatever, sometimes you just feel like, oh, I'm repeating myself, and so you kind of have to step away from it. So literally doing that and doing other things, not a musician, but, I have a little parlor guitar around, and, I'll bang around on that, or, take the dog for a walk,
Sure.
that kind of thing. Like, walking and doing something physical, especially walking, like that's the kind of the classic thing, right? Like somehow allows your brain to sort of still be working on a problem while your body and brain also has to focus on something else. And that seems to sort of shake some of that stuff loose.
It's absolutely that's a very good point. I just wonder about, like, when do you feel in your, not even in your career, but when did you think you found your purpose in life? Was there a defining moment where it was like, I'm going to stay on this path, and I may be a starving genius, I may be able to pay my bills, I may be able to have a family, I don't know, but this is the only thing, this is what my purpose in life is.
Yeah, that kind of happened early on, and it happened sort of it unfolded in two parts. The first time was in third grade, and this is going way back because
I like going way back. I like going back.
So late 70s, 1980, around there.
Man,
yeah. And we had like a substitute art teacher came in, and it was, I don't know, just this kind of like witchy 70s woman. She kind of was like, she looked like she should have been like, in Fleetwood Mac or something,
So, yeah, Buckingham Nicks kind of thing. Totally.
Yeah, like total Stevie Nicks, except she had dark hair. And like we were doing like something stupid, like like a little kid thing where you like put a string under a piece of paper and you use a crayon and you color over the string to like make these little patterns on the paper. And whatever like choices that I made or didn't make, she kind of stopped and looked at my paper, and she's like, "What sign are you?"
Oh my God, I love this.
I'm like, I don't know what that means. I'm in third grade. And she's like, well, when's your birthday? And I tell her my birthday, and she's like, oh, you're a Scorpio. That makes sense. You're an artist.
Oh dear.
And just like this beautiful witchy woman with like bracelets and turquoise jewelry, and she smelled nice, and it was just like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's right, I'm an artist. So like that was like the first moment where it seemed like And like I don't know what it was, but the real point where it hit home, and it basically is like what I do today. I went to a new school the next year in fourth grade. I didn't know anybody, and I was, like you back in the day, you had to like cover your book covers. You got your book from school, and you don't want to mess it up because you have to return it at the end
Yeah,
of
I
the
totally remember.
year.
You put brown paper bags on it.
Exactly,
Yeah, I did.
exactly. Yeah, you get the grocery bags, you bring them
Grocery
home, tape
bags.
them
Thank
on
you.
there.
Yeah, there you go.
But then you got to decorate it, like to make it fly. And so I started like drawing like Smurfs and Garfields like on mine, and
Sure.
like UFOs and stuff like that. And just always bored in school drawing, and like kind of like the most popular girl in our class, liked my Smurfs and asked me to draw on her book. And I knew that like she was like a big Michael Jackson fan or whatever. So I invented, in quotes, the Michael Jackson Smurf, which is basically just a Smurf with, like a glittery glove and sunglasses and like a leather jacket.
Oh
And,
man, I gotta see that picture, man.
yeah, I think I still have one around. It's, it was like prime, like, Thriller had just come out. So it was like peak Michael Jackson era. And then when other kids saw that on her book, they were like, yo, we want Smurfs or Garfields. Like, what up? Can you draw in our books? And so I started charging them. I know you probably talked to my brother Zeph. We
Oh
had
yeah.
kind of a weird childhood in a lot of ways, and one of the ways is that my mom was like a crazy health nut. We weren't allowed to have any sugar in the house. Like she didn't even cook with sugar. It was like honey, molasses, maple syrup. Those are the only, like if we went to a birthday party, we weren't allowed to like eat birthday cake.
That's unfortunate. No, I was gonna say like that's a very, I mean, very a lot of molasses in New Hampshire, but I still you
Yeah,
need a little sugar,
I know. So candy was off limits. So any chance to get candy clandestinely, I was going for it. So I started
Absolutely, yeah, I dig.
So I started drawing these drawings and like charging people like candy bars, like for a Twix or for a Reese's peanut butter cup, I'll draw you like a nice Garfield, with a Odie the dog, and
I dig it.
a
This is
couple
great.
Smurfs or whatever. And that was kind of like not only was it just fun and I was getting paid in candy bars, so I was like, whatever this is, like I want to do this for the rest of my life. And pretty girls are talking to me, and I, kind of went from like, some new kid at a school that no one knew to like a kid that knows how to draw stuff. And so that was kind of like when the light bulb first kicked on.
It's beautiful. I mean, I like that it came. I mean, just going back, it's hindsight. Maybe in hindsight, you'll have a better perspective on it, and you actually, obviously, I have, we both have kids growing up in this
Yeah.
time, and I just wonder if you can talk to younger cats specifically. I mean, do you feel like it was a benefit for you to have no technological distractions? I mean, in theory, I listened, I mean, I was born in 78. And so,
Yeah.
like, I mean, my parents were like, in Long Island in the winter, it was like
Hmm.
once I watched my TV limit, it would be like go out in the backyard and I had it
Exactly.
was like it was imagination, right? Like you had to
Exactly.
use your imagination. I just
Exactly.
wonder if your kids, how you deal with your own kids, and what would be your advice to other parents as it relates to like modulating the balance between imagination. I know my kids have it
Yeah.
just because I'm a freak, but it's like everybody has technology.
Yeah.
We're directly connected. You can create stuff essentially synthetically or artificially on your
Sure.
phone. But I'm
Sure.
talking like pen to paper,
Yeah.
indigenous creation. What would be your advice? How do you deal with your own kids? Because I feel like we were blessed to grow up when we did.
Yeah. I feel the same way. Although I didn't really appreciate it as much as a kid. We grew up without a TV for most of my childhood.
Mhm.
Um, Even the radio was banned, so like we had books and boredom, and like obviously,
I'm sorry, dude.
you
That's a
know,
great line, dude. Yeah.
uh,
No.
but boredom is the great
Yes.
creative spot. Like you have to be bored in order for your mind to work creatively. And kids these days, and and I'm addicted to my phone as much as the next kid, but like
Absolutely.
not having that boredom time doesn't allow your brain to go where it needs to go, and it's a problem. I try to, we put set limits on them for how much screen time they can use, and there's definitely no phones at the table during dinner and things like that. But on the other hand, like my kids had creative phases when they were younger, but they don't really seem to be that drawn to like creative endeavors. And as a parent who like does creative stuff, I'm kind of like, oh come on, like I want to relate to them, and I want to do fun projects with them and stuff. And but at the same time, like my parents weren't necessarily creative. So you don't necessarily come out of the box like your parents, but also I don't want to put any pressure on them, especially when my kids are older now. Like one's a freshman in high school, the other one's in seventh grade. But when they were younger in elementary school, and I was making books, we were always bringing in books, and
Sure.
giving gifts to his teachers and stuff. And so there was a lot of like talking in front of them, like, oh, you must be really into drawing because your dad draws. And my wife's she's a visual artist too, and a sculptor. But we like really try not to pressure them in any way to sort of like be like us,
Dude, it's perfect, man. No, because you know what?
That's
The only time it's going to happen is when they're organically drawn to it. So that's
that's
mazel
exactly.
tov to that. That's the thing. Like, um, it's just funny because Zeph and I, we were texting the other day, and he mentioned that the great drummer, dear friend Austin Beatty from Grateful
Oh
Shred,
yeah,
he like
yeah,
reached out to Zeph. He's like, "Yo, you know about this children's book? The guy has
yeah,
the same last name as you." And Zeph's like, "Yeah, that's my brother, man." And it's
yeah,
great because Austin's kids are really young, and
yeah,
so it's just like I feel like. Let me ask you also about like art itself. I don't care if it's
yeah,
interviews, if it's music, if it's illustrations. I mean, to me, there's a cumulative effect to it where, like, it
hmm,
may not resonate right away, and maybe
sure,
it will. But then, like, 5 years down the road, Zeph's reaching out. One of his bandmates is like, "Hey, my kids are into this book. This guy has your same last name." He's like, "Yeah, that's my brother." And it's just
yeah,
so it's like it just keeps kind of. I wonder if you could talk about how you organically grew your brand to the point where and how you kind of disseminate the content. I mean, it's a very if you're
sure,
not part of a corporate structure, then
right.
you're kind of like a one man band. Are you a one man band kind of to a degree?
Yeah, I mean, I work with all different publishers, like all the major publishers or whatever, but I'm just one guy in a studio filled with records and a dog, and just
I love it.
doing the thing.
Mm,
What's funny that you mentioned that, like Zeph and I have had so many like weird synchronicities that like crossover between what seems like very separate worlds, like children's book illustration and the music worlds.
right.
I mean, I'm very influenced by music, but don't really play it myself. But we've had so many moments. In fact, like just a couple examples besides the one you mentioned. Zeph had come down. I live in the Philly area, and he came down a few years back, and he was doing a solo show, and he was opening up for. I'm trying to find the guy's name right now. Jim. You'll
Yeah,
know
no,
who it
I
is.
think I know it. Jim Campolongo, maybe.
It wasn't
Was it
Campolongo.
Campolongo? I'm wondering. All right, yeah, we'll get it. We'll get it. Go
We'll
ahead.
get it,
Yeah.
but I'll come back to it and find his name. I'll switch to this other story. Just recently,
Yeah.
I was talking to an editor that I'd never worked with before, and she was, talking to my agent, and she was pitching me to illustrate a book that someone else had written, and I did sign on the book, and she's like, I don't know if this is appropriate to mention, but she's like, I was at this show, and there was this guy named Zephaniah Ohora, and it's so close to Zach's name. Like, they must be brothers or something. He was this great, musician. and da 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 da. And then so I end up talking to her. I'm like, yeah, that is definitely my brother. Where was this?
I love this thing.
And it was at the Neil Casal's memorial concert where Zephyr
Absolutely.
played at the Capitol Theater. I was like, yeah, I was there at that show too. I don't know. I still haven't met her in person ever, but she had worked on a book of Neil's photographs. Like because she works in children's, but she also worked in art books. She has a music background, so she had worked with Neil in the past and had become friends with him. So that was like, that's one example, like where you're like, oh my God, like that's a lot. But Jim Lauderdale is who I was trying to think
Jim
of.
Lauderdale.
You
Okay,
know who?
continue.
Do you
No,
know who
I'm
that is?
not hip to, but I'm not that hip a cat, so I don't know
I
what.
I
Yeah,
I don't know about that, man. I was looking at your list of people you interviewed.
yeah, I
It's
know. No, it's all
deep.
right.
Well, Jim Lauderdale, like I think you and I share a lot more. Like my background and interest in music definitely stems from more of a jazz and soul area. It goes
Absolutely.
everywhere, but that's the basis. But so I don't really know a lot of like singer songwriter more on the country side of things like Zeph does. But Jim Lauderdale, I think he worked with he did some stuff with actually with Jerry and the Dead and stuff, but he's kind of like one of those Nashville songwriters that like he's a musician's musician that people don't know his name, but he's written great songs. And but Zeph was opening up for him, and I took a photo of just like the sign, before I was going into it. And I was working with this woman who lives in San Diego, who I've never met. And she wrote this book called Bikes for Sale. And I just finished illustrating it, and she texts. I posted on Instagram just the photo of just their names together. She's like, "Is that your brother?" She texted me on the side. I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Well, Jim Lauderdale is my cousin." I'm
Jeez,
like,
my
"What?
God.
What are you talking about?" And like so we've had like there's been a number of like really weird synchronicity things.
See, here's the thing. This is. I mean, I don't want. This is going to go like into a deeper. First of all, this guy Lauderdale's a very heavy cat.
Yeah.
He hung out with Roland White, and Roland was he great mandolin player, but I mean
Okay.
this very heavy dude.
Yeah.
And so but like okay, so you talk about use the word synchronicity.
Yeah.
Zeph and I have spent a lot of time talking about
Yeah.
um, you know, spirit and source. And I grew up
Sure.
essentially, I don't know what the right word is, agnostic, or
Uh-huh.
my folks were, they actually don't
Yeah.
realize how spiritual they are. But, my dad was
Yeah.
Jewish, my mom was Catholic.
Hmm.
And so, they grew up with the idea of, oh, what a coincidence. But there aren't,
Right.
in my mind and my
There are
life and
none.
my journey,
Yeah.
there are no
For
coincidences.
sure. Yeah.
And I just wonder about, not the sugar ban or the no TV or the no radio or sort of,
Yeah.
that kind of like push away from any kind of modernization, but at the
Yeah.
source, when you felt like you had connected with the spirit, I just wonder how,
Yeah.
because you guys as a family, I mean, to me, like all this stuff just revolves around the fact that um, you guys are all connected by source. And I just wanted you to
Yeah.
talk a little as a family. Talk a little bit about like how you wound up staying true to your connection to source without being resentful of the fact that maybe your family had an unorthodox way of raising you guys.
Still working through the try
Absolutely.
not to be resentful
Me
part,
too.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, well, I've had enough years to like really think about it. And I like we grew up in a very like very strict like post Jesus movement, born again, fundamentalist, right wing, waiting for the rapture, Jesus is coming any second kind of
Gee,
thing.
my God.
So that sort of like that atmosphere and that sort of constant thing sort of it when I was younger, it made me feel like I was born too late. The end of the world was going to happen. It was inevitable. There, all the adults in my life were telling me it's going to happen any day. And so I kind of like had it kind of formed into like an angry nihilism where you're like, well, what is the point of anything if if life's going to be over any second because the world is ending,
Absolutely.
like what's the
Absolutely.
point of anything? Like what's the point of planning for the future? And so there was sort of like a hopelessness that turned into like a real chip on the shoulder, resentful rebelliousness that it kind of came out of that. But now with a like, as soon as I got out of the house, I moved out when I was like 16, but with years to look back on it, I am appreciative of not so much the dogma that we grew up with because I reject most of it, but I do appreciate that idea of spirit and sort of being aware that like we're not just mental, physical, emotional human beings. Like there is a spiritual aspect of everything, and that there's more than one like there's more to this reality than just what we can see and touch with our five senses.
I love it. I
So
freaking love.
that
No, I
I'm
mean this is like
appreciative of.
no, I mean like, but and obviously I mean your kids are a little right around my kids' ages, but I mean
Yeah,
I also try to talk to them about the fact that I don't know if the word is faith
yeah,
or but there's this resolve or this
yeah,
deep well of inspiration that comes from the what you just talked about, even though they were somewhat, like the Lauderdale example, other things
yeah,
like that. To me, like you go beyond the percentage of coincidence, it's
mhm,
unquantifiable. There's
yeah,
something beyond. We don't really can't explain it. We don't really know it, but it's
yeah,
there. And
for
we grew
sure.
up in this time now where our kids are basically being told or force fed the
Yeah,
idea that everything is knowable. And yet
right.
I try to say that there are there
I
are miracles. There are things that happen
totally.
beyond, and I
Yeah,
think
I
I
I,
give
re-
you I give you a
I
lot of credit
reject
for
that.
yeah, I just give you a lot of credit for being able to keep your heart. I think ultimately, how did you learn to? I mean, you went out on your own. It's not like you weren't a trust fund kid. It was not. I mean, you had a
No,
bill. I
no,
mean,
opposite of that.
how did you learn to keep your heart open even though you received a lot of jaded knowledge? I mean, clearly
Yeah,
we're still here. The rapture has not come yet.
yeah.
Yeah,
Surprise.
yeah. Some might disagree, but I
uh,
mean, we're in crazy times, but still,
oh yeah, yeah,
how
yeah.
I just want you to talk to people
Um,
how you kept your
you,
heart open.
it was traveling, meeting other people, but a lot of it honestly was, just taking a lot of like LSD.
Well, let's
Well,
talk
to be
about that. I
honest.
mean, so
Yeah,
let's. I mean, because I know Zeph was he's younger than you, but right
yeah,
is so
yeah. We're
yeah
like 10 years apart. Yeah,
he was dosing very hard in like the Cambridge, Boston area. Can
yeah,
you talk a little bit about like where the setting and the kind of LSD you
sure.
got your hands on, and ultimately the
Sure.
reality of things just sort of um,
Oh
being able
yeah.
to sort of sit in the mess. The floor is yours.
Um, yeah, I mean I went right to the epicenter of that. I I graduated high school in 1992,
Mm, mm,
and I hitchhiked out to we have some family in San Francisco. We didn't really know like San Francisco Bay Area outside of San Francisco. So, and I was, really into Kerouac and the Beats and, William Burroughs and Bukowski and, reading those kinds of books.
right.
And I wasn't into the Dead yet, but, hitchhiking out there and settling in San Francisco eventually after 4 or 5 months of hitchhiking up and down the coast, Route 1 and, went up in Big Sur and read Big Sur and while I was up in Big Sur and,
Wow.
um, I had some really good friends. Like all my roommates were into, hardcore deadheads. Um, and they had a really good, which now in hindsight, I realize like it was a little secretive, but we always had like a liquid vial of really good, really pure liquid LSD in the fridge that definitely came from like the Nick Sands lab,
Wow. Wow.
Bolinas era. I think at that point he might have been up. I know that like my roommates went to Bolinas and like, re-upped on it, but it was all very secretive. So I don't know exactly who and what, but looking at the timeline and after seeing the documentary about him and stuff, I was like, because I remember like when he got busted a couple years later with like 95, 96, like that was like all of a sudden like that liquid LSD, connection dried up, and my roommates were really upset.
Were they like were they maybe just kind of taking eye drops a little bit, like put a little drop in there? I remember people talking
Yeah.
Billy Kreutzmann. They
Well,
used to take bottle caps like and just sort of
yeah.
put in your eyes, you know.
Yeah, we just like it was a dropper, and we would drop it in our hand, and you kind of lick it off your own hand. I didn't really. It always seemed weird. I know people did that, but it seemed weird to like stick it right in your eye.
I know. I'm
I
so
don't like
there,
to
dude.
stick anything in my eyes.
Yeah, so you lick it off. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did.
So but it was like it was a very intentional. I mean, we were also, following the Dead around. I went to see a lot of shows on the West Coast. Not the best era of the Dead, but the experience of it was still, a pretty heavy thing. But it was very intentional. If I was doing mushrooms, I was, fasting for a day before, setting, and yeah, it was partying and having fun, but it was definitely like trying to, reach for the secrets of the universe, access those things, and all the, sort of cliche things that you think about of those experiences, like definitely happened and were super profound. The illusion that we're all separate, beings, and, all that kind of stuff, kind of circles back to what you were talking about with there is no real coincidence.
Coincidence. Absolutely.
Synchronicity
Absolutely.
is
Yeah.
probably the better word for it. Um, so, a couple years of doing that, regularly every weekend or a couple times a week, and just, really, just laying out on the floor and putting on, old Dead, like my roommate had a DAT machine, and we're listening to that stuff, and I was
Ah,
really into Frank Zappa, and getting really into jazz and stuff. So it was a lot of deep, exploration of music, and, just discussing, the mysteries, all the great mysteries.
what do you feel about how not that it opened your worldview, but just the idea that it gave you permission in the most vulnerable moments to forgive your parents.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It actually, it made me see their humanity,
Exactly.
and it helped me to, for a while at least, like I was able to, sort of forgive where they're coming from, and connect with them, and just kind of love them as, as people. But like that, a little bit of that wears off over
Absolutely.
time.
No,
You
I
know what I
mean,
mean? It's like you
totally, dude.
probably
Yeah,
you probably
go
have to go back to the source and flush the pipes out every once in a while to like get back in touch. You know what I mean?
ahead. For a couple questions just popped into my head.
Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
hip? Are you hip to William Steig, the
Oh
children?
yeah. Oh
Okay,
yeah. Big fan.
so Steig. I mean, I grew up with his books, but then you must know Jeremy Steig, his son, right?
Of course.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
The
that
flute player.
I'm
Yeah.
just thinking, like, I know you're not father to son here, but that's you and Zeph right there. You know, it's like Will Steig, because I mean,
Yeah.
Jeremy was such a genius. Those guys were
Oh
cutting
yeah.
tape and splicing tape, and
Totally.
I mean, but Williams, it's beautiful to me. Like that dude was such a
His
badass.
his drawings have so many levels to them too. They're pretty incredible. Yeah, I love Jeremy Steig. I love his work with like the early stuff with the satyrs, which is kind of more like blues
Dude, Denny
rock.
Zeit, dude, that shit is
Yeah. Yeah,
ridiculous,
Dennis
dude.
Zeitlin, all the
Yeah.
that I have all those records, man. I love, and of course, I mean, just like everybody else, it was like I found, Howling for Judy, I found through
There
the
you
Beach
go.
Boys. Um,
Well, no, then there's like all these. There's a couple of Blue Note albums. There's one where he's sitting on a
yeah,
dock, and it's a really weird quartet,
yeah,
like very. But that dude, I've interviewed so many cats who worked with him, and he was such a brilliant
amazing.
guy. And I regret not being able to talk to him. But I want to read this. I'm not sure if you're hip to
Yeah.
the concert promoter John Shear, but
I am aware through, the dead
no,
circle.
you're a music
Yeah,
head. So I want to read you this quote from one of our interviews and then have you react to it,
yeah.
especially as it relates to your time in the early 90s in San Francisco. he said, he said, I was just reading Polestar, which is one of the trade magazines of the music industry. You look at the top 10 grossing shows of the recent past, you're talking about average ticket prices that are beyond the means of the average middle class family. If the average ticket is $125 times two, you and your significant other, parking and tolls and gas, a beer and a hot dog, let alone dinner, adds up to the point. If you're a family that operates on a $75,000 or $100,000 a year income, you're not going to do that very often. Average tickets for the Foo Fighters, who were the biggest grossing draw, interview was about 10 years ago, was $82.18. Then you go to Andre Bocelli, and it's 177. To Fleetwood Mac, which is 131. Justin Timberlake, 120. Those are the average ticket prices. If the average ticket price for Fleetwood Mac is $131, then you know the top tickets are over 200. The middle class cannot afford to go to to go to concerts, or very many of them, because when you start having to decide between having enough lunch money versus going to a concert, it starts to become a little easier decision, or paying your gas and electric bill, or your mortgage for that matter. That's all being caused by the consolidation of the concert business, with Live Nation leading the way. The Justice Department, for one reason or another, has allowed the consolidation to continue. A few years ago, Live Nation and Ticketmaster merged. Ticketmaster is overwhelmingly the largest ticket operation in North America. It's a good operation, but as an independent concert promoter, they sell my tickets. Therefore, the information about the customers who come to my shows gets handed to my biggest competitor. At this point, they don't even make decisions. They don't even believe they don't share it with the concert division. The public is really the ones who have suffered the most. I don't see an end to it, to be perfectly candid with you. Now, I factor all that in. That was 10 years ago, and things have only consolidated more. What was the vibe like about, not that you were an independent concert promoter, but just the idea of being able to see heavy acts just pop up out of the blue in the regional area of San Francisco? Because to me, that was the magic of music at that time, whether it was jazz or psychedelic rock, was just there. Not everything was so consolidated. So, you might look at a local rag and be like, oh, shoot, this cat's playing here. I just wanted you to talk about that vibe, because when I talked to Zeph, when he first hit me to you, he's like, my brother was really at the epicenter of sort of that last taste of
gasp.
Yeah, man. I want you to break it. The floor is yours, man. Break it down.
As someone that was, 19, 20, 21, just what you're saying. I mean, tickets were cheaper, but I was willing to sacrifice, other qualities of life in order to go to concert experiences and have those experiences. That was sort of my number one priority. If I had any, extra money, not that there was extra, but
exactly.
I was lucky to sort of, like, the Family Dog had reopened, Sailors Hall and stuff, and they were just kind of, there was a lot of shows there. Anything Dead related. Of course, Jerry was playing the Warfield all the time, so we're bopping down there. But then also, like, people like they would have like free, concerts on the summer solstice, where you could see, Ramblin' Jack Elliott, or Harvey, the Snake.
Harvey Mandel.
Like, see him, and, like all these, like, the first time I ever wandered into Golden Gate Park, it was like the remnants of Jefferson Airplane were playing a show there or something like that, and it was very much still kind of a freaky town at the time when I got there. And then a few years later, a couple of things happened. One was I worked at a sign shop south of Market, and we always listened to KPOO, which was like the local jazz station that was on Divisadero Street. And they had, and I attended, there was the John Coltrane Church was on Divisadero.
That is so beautiful, man. Go ahead, continue. This is unbelievable.
A block from my house. And I would go there on Sundays and listen, and there were long services where they would serve dinner after, and they would play the whole Love Supreme and all that stuff. And it was incredible.
God.
One of the sisters of that church also ran a Coltrane show on Tuesday mornings on KPOO. and it didn't have like a large broadcast. It was pretty local. And they would give away tickets to shows at Yoshi's all the time if you were like the 10th caller or whatever. And I'd be at work and I just have I'd have the KPOO number like dialed into like all 10 lines at the place, and I would win tickets like every
I
week.
love it, dude.
They never like, you gave your name, and like it wasn't like a corporate radio station, so they didn't ever limit you. So I would go every week to see these free shows at Yoshi's, and with Pharoah Sanders and Ahmad Jamal and
Wow. Dewey,
you know
like who was local? Like Dewey Redman or Bishop Norman
Dewey
Williams?
Redman was,
Yeah,
all those guys were around and
yeah.
local. Billy Higgins was like playing with I think he must have lived in the Bay Area because he seemed like he was playing with everybody. Like I kind of always
Dude, I
felt like he
cannot believe
backed
you were seeing
people.
Billy Higgins at Yoshi's every week, dude. That's insane.
Pretty much all, it was crazy. So there was that, and then it took me a few years to get my act together to actually go to college. I went to California College of Arts and Crafts in San Francisco and Oakland when I was like 24. And I met a buddy there who was also like a heavy jazz head. And he was working for the San Francisco Jazz Festival. And so he got me a gig at the Jazz Festival. At first, we were sort of like, they would have like 3 shows a night, and we were like we drove the equipment truck because some of the shows were set up like in the SF Opera House or the Masonic Hall or Grace Cathedral or whatever, but they also had to set up stuff in other areas or outside. So we were, running all the equipment, and we had this huge truck we were driving. And I did that for a couple, probably like 1 year. They had like a spring and a fall festival. And then I asked to be moved to be a driver. And then I got to pick everybody up at the airport, bring them to the show, bring them to their hotel,
Oh
hang
my
out
God.
backstage, get them sign my records. So like in the next year, I was like driving Elvin Jones around with his wife, and
Oh, with the wait, what was her name? I have it on the tip of my tongue.
uh,
Japanese cat. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And she kind of spoke mostly for him. Like she was like a real boss. Like she was a little
Oh
scary.
my! I cannot believe you were hanging with Elvin in
Uh,
the car, driving Elvin around. Dude. That's
Charles Lloyd. I spent a day with Charles Lloyd.
a day. You spent a full day with Charles Lloyd.
Like just from like bringing him back and forth from sound check, and chatting with him with stuff,
Oh my
and
God, that is sick. That
just
is,
amazing people. Like Yusef, I spent a day with Yusef Lateef. Just
oh.
took him for like some halal food. Um,
Yeah, those
yeah,
guys were like, "Yo, man, like, yeah, I'm hungry. Get me some. Let's get some grub."
yeah,
Those
yeah.
guys
And
are,
like there
yeah.
was times where like we just had to kill some time before something was ready, and I knew how like unbelievable, I was such like a massive fan, and had all these guys' records at home, and I wish I brought more records to sign, but it was
Whatever.
kind of frowned upon, and it was like you don't want to be that guy,
No,
but
dude, you were a hard. You're not a fanboy. You're a hardcore dude, man. It's like you're not bringing a freaking record to get signed. You're
yeah,
hanging with
I
these
mean,
cats.
that's the thing. I did get some sign. I mean, a funny one that you'll probably
Yeah,
appreciate is that I had to drive McCoy Tyner to the airport, and I
I
was like,
love
well,
this, dude.
I'm gonna get him to sign a record. Like, I don't care if I seem like a fanboy. I can't not
It's
do it.
McCoy, dude. Come on. Yeah.
I mean, come on. And so I'm looking through all my Coltrane records, and as you know, like most of those records have very dark covers. Like they don't, like a Sharpie isn't gonna show up on the cover
Absolutely,
if they're all
dude.
black.
Absolutely.
So I picked Ascension.
Dude,
Uh,
I'm listening. I was gonna say it's downstairs. I'm like, it's a white cover, ABC
yeah,
Impulse. That's the
yeah.
one to get signed.
Yeah, I'm like, all right, this is the one because it'll show up. Now, I didn't know until years later, and he signed it. He was gracious about it, and but here's the rub: is that like that's the recording that made him leave the quartet because he hated it so much.
Okay, so
And
I was thinking first off, oh my God, I haven't looked at there's some different cats on there. At first I thought maybe he's not on there, but he was on there, and he just
that
he had to walk away.
that's the last record because like what Coltrane, where the direction he was going on. McCoy didn't feel like there was any room for him to play anything. He was just kind of like, the barrage of sound was like pushing out any space that he had to do what he did, and that's what made him quit the band.
He was
And
also,
that's what,
I mean, was he? I'm curious. I feel like at that point he was ready to take on his own band anyway. He was ready to be a leader.
for sure. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, I think expansions or whatever, like those records came out right after.
exactly.
If
Right.
if they were probably being recorded at the same time, but it was just like it felt like a gaff to me, who like I considered myself like kind of a scholar of Coltrane Quartet. They seemed to like their one peak of like the heavy duty, like real spiritual intent of
Absolutely,
jazz.
man. Gee.
But to make the guy sign the like the thorn in his side of like the album that made him leave the Coltrane Quartet seemed
I'm
like
just trying
such a
to think
gaff.
about like live at Birdland,
Yeah,
all the Seattle, like all those covers are a Sharpie would never be seen on those. So you
yeah,
were kind of
yeah.
it's kind of a catch 22 for you. I
Maybe
didn't
like
really,
My Favorite Things or something that has like a blue cover, but like all those Impulse records are like dark
dark.
cover, very shadowy photography on them.
I just wonder about like this is sort of like a metaphysical question, but I don't
Yeah,
care how much that you do, that KPOO or
yeah,
the okay, like I don't care how big a reach it had. I just
yeah,
wonder like sociologically. I mean, obviously you were a freak like me. You were calling it, getting the
yeah.
tickets and listening, but like the fact that that music was still being pumped out to the
Oh
masses,
yeah,
I just wonder what you feel like because that music Charles Lloyd music and
yeah.
Yusef's music and Elvin with Train.
Hmm.
That is not. I mean, that's jazz, but that's
Yeah,
actually more spiritual music.
for sure,
It's like
for
healing
sure.
music, and I just wonder, like, you know, to me, I have a big problem now with the corporate stranglehold. A lot. I'm not saying they're dictating from the top, but
Right.
music now, especially, they don't want to play music like that, especially on the radio, because they don't want to disturb people. Because a lot of that music can be very provoking in some ways. You
Yeah,
know, you can be introspective, and to me, like that's the only way you can grow. You're not music is
yeah,
not made for pacification. I don't
yeah.
want to
No
hear
doubt.
smooth jazz, and I just wondered, like,
Uh,
do you feel like that even at that time? That it was helpful to be pumping out Coltrane even on a local station, how that helped society evolve in that because in the mid 90s, that's when I went to college. There was
yeah,
you had Medeski, Martin, and Wood. You had sort of this
sure.
rebirth of really good conversational music.
Right.
And do you think it played a part? That lack of restriction was still there, and I'm wondering if you think
Yeah.
that played a role in sort of still evolving consciousness. We weren't in the front row of the Vanguard to C Train, but
Right.
just the
Right.
idea that it was still being played is
Yeah.
remarkable.
Well, I mean, particularly that show because it was like one of the sisters that was in the Coltrane church. Like they were upfront about like he's their patron saint. Like he was actually like the African Orthodox Church like gave okay for them to have Coltrane be their patron saint. So like they were upfront that it was a spiritual mission. Um and they talked about it throughout the show. So like what they were doing, like they were on a mission, and I heard it.
But
um
he was uh, he was God essentially. I mean, he was the God figure. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think that they,
I'm
I mean,
sorry, I don't want to butcher that stuff. I'm trying
they,
to. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that they recognize, uh, because they were also like Jesus-based church or whatever. But they recognize that in the moment of Coltrane's playing, that he is a vessel for the divine.
That's right.
So the transformation of him playing elevates him to like a vessel of the Holy Spirit or something of God. So in that moment, there's no separation. He's not God per se, but there's no separation between him and God because he is so open to communing with the divine and letting it flow through him. And that I think was the most important aspect of it.
It's incredibly articulate. You know, we're gonna have to do set two because this is like we have so much more to get to. But I mean, can you just talk about being a music head, being somebody who, in my mind, has great taste in music? I mean, just the albums that I saw on Fuzzytown was like, my man. I mean, a guy that that really put me on my path was Cal Jader and
Oh man,
Roy Ayers and
yeah,
like
the
all these
best.
beautiful cats, Milt Jackson and all. Is music, was it ever? I know Zeph found his groove to a degree with the sort of the dude at the church that you guys grew up with. He
Yeah,
had the
yeah,
shades on. He was smoking
yeah, yeah,
cigs, and Zeph got into the
yeah,
band. The
yeah,
the idea, the nexus between being a conduit for
yeah,
God, for the spirit and music, like that to me has saved me the last few years. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about, while it's not like where you said he at that point when he was channeling and he was just a vessel for the divine. And
yeah,
when did that sink in with you? Was that when you started to go to shows on LSD? Did that happen early on? Because to me, I don't think a lot of regular cats understand the
yeah,
power and the healing power of rhythm
yeah.
and spiritual music, because they're basically having digital beats crunched into their ears and they don't know
Totally,
what it's really about. And when
totally.
did that dawn on you?
I think you know, similarly to Zeph, like there were, I mean, the music in that church was not great, but they were all trying to be like sort of like post Dylan, the band,
Totally, dude.
whatever. So they did have moments when they were like stretching it out that we sort of recognize in the Grateful Dead, those, and we always joke about, worship band Bobby or whatever moments. And they're like, those are the moments where like you get the goosebumps, and everybody in the audience, there's no difference between the audience and the people on stage, and everyone's connected, and those are, I mean, even as a kid, that was we recognize that as like special moments. And for sure I was following that in music, and definitely LSD kind of made my ears even bigger. And but we were always intentionally listening. We always loved music, and it was like the difference between being passive listeners and intentional listeners is great. And not everyone is interested in being more than a passive listener to music, but we were kind of always had that in us already. But certainly those experiences and LSD for sure, and going to shows high, like took that to another level, for like no doubt about it. And then you kind of realize like, oh, this is what human beings have always done. Like, yeah, the Grateful Dead was this thing that was like for 30 years or whatever, but like this is just a reincarnation of a very ancient thing that's like crucial to humanity.
Zachariah, I am actually in a bit of a well, I don't need to go into it right now. Let's do set two really soon, man. It's such a ball
Would
talking to
love
you,
to,
man.
man.
All right, man. Yeah,
I appreciate it.
we got a lot
Thanks
more to
for
do.
having me, man. This is great. Good. I love to talk about this. I can talk about it forever.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, much love, man.
All right. Likewise,
Talk
man.
to you soon, brother.
All right. Take care.
Peace, man. Peace.